Marina, I will deal with your question because I think it's relevant to the topic, and I will give you a general answer of how Prabhupada dealt with offenders and how we can apply that in relationships. And when we're speaking here of husband and wife, we're also speaking of any relationship because the dynamics of relationships are similar. So, I'll give you a general way Prabhupada dealt with people who were offenders. Now, Prabhupada never considered people personally offending him. The only people that he was upset with were people who were offending Krishna, which is different, and I don't think you're asking that. But I thought I would throw that in just so we can distinguish. If someone's offending Krishna, and Prabhupada felt that Mayavadis were offending Krishna, then he was very upset with them, for sure. But as far as personally being upset, that is different. And how Prabhupada wanted for us to deal with people who were offending us was not to take offense. Now Prabhupada wanted us to deal with people we were offending was to ask them for forgiveness. Now, the idea of ourselves being offended is an interesting idea, because for us to be offended, we have Sundarupa. There's no video, so don't worry, you're just going to hear. Yeah. So the idea of ourselves being offended is interesting, because that means we have in some way to determine what an offense is to us, and if we consider that valid. In other words, someone may do something to me which I don't consider offensive, or they may do something to me which I do consider offensive, and for you it may be the opposite, that you may have taken offense for the action that I didn't take offense, and vice versa. So, in the ideal sense, in the ultimate sense, should a devotee take offense? Well, from the examples we have in Srimad Bhagavatam, the answer would emphatically be no. But the reality is we do. Why do we? Because we're not on that level. But still, the concept of ourselves taking offense, we should feel is personal weakness, and which stems from many things, but first I will address it from the point of view of tolerance. Let's look at it as stemming from, or one way it happens is a lack of tolerance. Now, tolerance is connected with humility, or we should say lack of tolerance is connected with pride. Because if you think about it, when we are intolerant, it's because we're giving ourselves a lot of importance, and we don't feel that we deserve to be treated a certain way. Now, I'm not saying that we should be unlimitedly tolerant and allow people to completely abuse us. There is a limit to tolerance, because if we allow people to totally abuse us and run over us, we may go crazy, or we may not be able to peacefully execute our Krishna consciousness. And we all have our thresholds of tolerance, but I think it's important that we understand that the pure devotee has more or less unlimited tolerance. So that's an example there for us, like Nityananda, unlimited tolerance, Ambarish Maharaj, being offended by Durvasa Muni, unlimited tolerance. So how much can we tolerate? But even we may have to put our foot down and say, I can't tolerate any more than this. Tell another person your behavior has become intolerable. Still, we should understand it's our intolerance and not ultimately the behavior of another person. And our intolerance comes from ultimately our sense of self-importance, that I don't deserve to tolerate this. I don't deserve to be treated this way. It's not fair the way you treat me. Don't you know who I am? Or who do you think you are that you can treat me this way? So we're giving ourselves a lot of importance. Now, someone might say, but if you don't give yourself some importance, or give yourself some value, people will run over you. So I'm not saying that you don't give yourself value in the sense of some kind of psychological problem. I'm looking at it more in the sense of genuine humility, that genuine humility comes in the form of, I'm not that important, I'm just one of unlimited numbers of entities. And so if someone mistreats me, it's not that important. I'm not the center of the universe. So we have to see that if we're thinking that way in some way, then it's, if we got even a shadow of that, then it becomes more difficult for us. I don't know if that's the right word, but we'll just say it becomes more difficult for us to take offense. Because then we begin to think, well, am I so important that I would consider what a person did to be offensive? And who am I to determine that was offensive? Of course, normally we say it's offensive because we feel offended, and so that's what I'm dealing with. Why do we feel offended? And oftentimes we feel offended because of the self-importance we give to ourselves. Don't you know who I am? How dare you say that? How dare you act that way with me? Something like that. What right do you have to deal with me that way? Now, on a higher level, and of course I'm speaking on a very high level here, and you may listen to this and think, wow, this is pretty high. But on a higher level, a devotee will see, for example, if somebody comes and does something that's very disturbing, to which we feel offended, on a higher level, a devotee will think Krishna sent that person and there's a reason, either karmically, that I had done something to that person and they're only getting back to me, or that Krishna is using this person to help me become more humble, to point out a fault or something like that. So a more advanced devotee will feel this way. Now, if we take this, and then you're all sitting there thinking, yes, but I'm not that advanced. But okay. But still, we always start on that level. We always start on the highest level to understand what is the standard which we're shooting for, and what is proper. And I think on Facebook, I don't know if it was posted or will be posted, that I said that it's not that we always feel something, but we are supposed to act as if we felt that way. In other words, if I feel offended, but let's say I was on a higher level, how would I act? Even though I feel offended, I would act in a way where I would think, is this, am I getting a reaction? Or is there something I need to learn? Or is Krishna just trying to make me become more humble because I'm not and I need to be? So that's how I would act. That's how I would act through it, even though I don't feel it. So that's why we understand what the standard is, so that we can act that way even if we're not feeling that way. And of course, some of you might say, but how can you act in a way that you're not feeling? Well, that's what we're learning to do as devotees, to not just go with our feeling. So now, when we're offended, one of the things we can think, and it's nice to think like this, is that Krishna's giving me an opportunity to practice tolerance. I feel offended, okay, that's my conditioned response. I don't feel that this was proper, I don't deserve to be treated this way. I feel offended. And then we go and we think Krishna's giving me now an opportunity to become more tolerant. He's given me an opportunity to be more accepting. He's given me perhaps an opportunity to practice a little more humility and just accept the situation. Karmically, somehow or other, it happened. See, another thing which is very interesting is a lot of times we get upset about what happened. And in this case, let's say we get upset and say, I don't deserve to be treated that way by this person. But it's also good to think it just happened. So now the fact that it just happened and we're thinking, I don't deserve to be treated this way, now we're living in the past because what happened a second ago or a year ago, whenever it happened. Now it stopped happening, and then we are dealing with the results of what happened. So, and now what happened we can't change because it already happened. But the only thing we can change at that moment in time is how we want to go forward from that point. And now, do I want to dwell on what happened? Do I want to remain upset with what happened? Obviously, that's what ordinary people do. And of course, we are a little bit ordinary as we're trying to become Krishna conscious, so we have so many ordinary things about us, but that's what ordinary people do. And becoming Krishna conscious means we want to be like extraordinary people. So we don't want to act like ordinary people as far as possible. So now at that point, of course, as a side point, I would say even ordinary people don't always act this way because they understand, okay, that happened, I can't go back and change it. And that's an important thing to realize. We say, Krishna says, we say, Guru says, everybody in Krishna consciousness knows we're not the controller. But when we become upset by a situation and we feel offended, basically what we're doing is we're not accepting that just happened. So that's a manifestation of us not really understanding we're not the controller. It happened, I can't change it, and now I'm upset because I wish it didn't happen. I wish it wouldn't have happened. And now I'm dwelling on what happened and feeling I don't deserve to be treated that way. Better response to that is to go forward and from your side, don't deal with the person the way they dealt with you, but you deal with the person in a peaceful and a calm way. That's what we're trying to learn. So that way, Marina, you don't really take offense or get offended, because if you take offense or get offended, what happens is you will begin to respond as an offended person, right? That's where the problem comes. Rather than saying, okay, it happened, it's past, Krishna is teaching me something, it's something I deserve, or he just wants me to become more tolerant, or Krishna is now looking and to see how I will respond to this situation. Can I respond in a Krishna conscious way even though I was not treated the way I would prefer to be treated? That's a better way to look at it, and that's what we're learning to do in Krishna consciousness. And now, can I go forward from that moment, not dwelling on what happened? If I can, then I'll make great advancement in Krishna consciousness. If I can't, I'll tend to be too much controlled by people, environment, which ultimately means being controlled by the modes of nature. Now, I think this is super important to understand when we're talking about very close relationships, which would be relationships such as husband and wife, or family, or work environment, where you're working very close with somebody, either as a devotee or in your own job. Because these things are going to happen, and you want to, in close relationships, you want, as far as possible, to have positive exchange, as many positive exchanges as possible. And if sometimes there's a negative exchange which comes from one side, then at least you can reciprocate with being neutral or being positive, so you counteract it. Because if you respond negatively, then, as we know, two wrongs don't make a right. It becomes much worse. I think I was mentioning in another class, and sometimes I'll repeat myself, as I think it's worth repeating important points, that, there's a saying, it takes two to tango, and in other words, it takes two people to fight, or of course it takes two people to make a good relationship, but it doesn't take two people to improve a relationship. It only takes one person. And people always get hung up and say, well, if you're not going to act this way, then I'm not going to act this way. And then the relationship never improves. But rather, the proper thinking is, okay, the other person is not acting properly, but that doesn't mean that I should act improperly, because it's really not smart, and it's kind of immature. But if you try to improve a relationship and you do everything right, generally there's a good chance the relationship will improve. At least you've done the right thing. you're being Krishna conscious. So what I would say is, even if you feel offended, deal with it so you don't act on that feeling. You may express to the person later on, you might say, I know what what you did wasn't, you don't always do it and it's not such a big thing, but I have a difficult time when I'm treated that way. I know it's just my weakness, so if you can consider that. I mean, if you feel it's really a problem for you, then you could ask them, this is hard for me when you deal with me this way, it's hard for me. Now, what we go through in our forgiveness workshop, so Marina, you haven't been to it, but there's a section in the forgiveness workshop where we look at why we get offended. And we have a saying in America that, he pushes my buttons. And the reason we get offended is we have buttons. So when we say he pushes my buttons, then you just think about, well, what are the buttons that you have that people push? Because I'm sure your buttons are different from my buttons, are different from your neighbor's buttons, and different from your boss's buttons, and your mother's buttons, and your husband's buttons, and this and that person's buttons. We all have different buttons. So in the forgiveness workshop, we discover what those buttons are, we become aware of them, and then we see that the behavior of an individual will push one person's buttons and not another person's buttons. So there is a subjectivity there to being offended because of our buttons. Now, Marina, if you didn't have those buttons, then the same behavior wouldn't upset you. And what we discussed in the forgiveness workshop is what we want to have Krishna conscious buttons. We don't want to have buttons, if somebody pushes your buttons and you become angry, or you become envious, or you become offended, or you become revengeful. Those are all buttons that we don't want to carry with us, because those are not qualities that we're trying to develop. So we want to have buttons of like kindness, compassion, understanding. All the qualities that Krishna describes in the Gita that are qualities which manifest in a devotee. And not only that, Krishna says those are qualities of one who's dear to him, and that's how we become dear to him. So it's interesting. If you go to the 12th chapter, and Krishna lists all the qualities of a devotee who's dear to him. And there are 35 qualities, I believe, and I was just reading, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur said, to become dear to Krishna, a devotee should at least have 7. So you don't have to worry that you don't have all 35, but at least to have 7. So what's a nice meditation is that when you're in a situation where you feel offended, and you could respond with something offensive to the person who, quote-unquote, offended you, you can think about how Krishna describes a devotee who is dear to him. And one of the things he describes is that he's equipoised in happiness and distress. So, if someone offends you, that's distress. But you don't take it that way. You're just equipoised, you're equal. He doesn't put anyone in anxiety. So now if you get offended, if you let the other person know how offended you are, you could put them in anxiety, or definitely you'll put yourself in anxiety, so you're also a person. So really you could say, don't put yourself in anxiety. He's a kind friend to all living beings. He's free from all false ego. On and on and on. So we have an opportunity to become dear to Krishna, to please Krishna, to be someone that Krishna is attracted to, that Krishna wants to be around by acting according to the qualities that Krishna describes in the 12th chapter of the Gita. You want me to read them to you? Let me see if I can get it on my database. If it'll come up. Yeah. I'll read them to you. It gives you, it's nice to hear, and it gives us an idea of how we can act that would be dear to Krishna. So Krishna says, begins in verses 13. Begins with verse 13, chapter 12. If you have a Gita, you can follow along. One who is not envious, but is a kind friend to all living entities, who does not think himself a proprietor, and is free from false ego, who is equal both in happiness and distress, who is tolerant, always satisfied, self-controlled, and engaged in devotional service with determination, his mind and intelligence fixed on me, such a devotee of mine is very dear to me. Text 15. He by whom no one is put into difficulty, and who is not disturbed by anyone, who is equipoised in happiness and distress, fear and anxiety, is very dear to me. So here we say, not disturbed by anyone. We'll go back and discuss these. My devotee who is not dependent on the ordinary course of activities, who is pure expert, without cares, free from all pains, and not striving for some result, is very dear to me. One who neither rejoices nor grieves, who neither laments nor desires, and who renounces both auspicious and inauspicious things, such a devotee is very dear to me. One is equal to friends and enemies, who is equipoised in honor and dishonor, heat and cold, happiness and distress, fame and infamy, who is always free from contaminating association, always silent and satisfied with anything, who doesn't care for any residence, who is fixed in knowledge, and who is engaged in a devotional service, such a person is very dear to me. Those who follow this imperishable path of devotional service and who completely engage themselves with faith, making me the supreme goal, are very, very dear to me. So, here we see that Krishna is saying, if we're satisfied, if we're not disturbed by distress, what else did he say that was really nice? He doesn't grieve, he's not grieving, rejoicing or grieving, lamenting or desiring. You know, like when you're upset or offended, you could grieve, you could lament, without cares, free from pains. It's causing you pain. This other one, that was really good. You don't put anyone into difficulty. That means you don't, I'm offended, then you shoot out at the person and cause them distress. And then here, is not disturbed by anyone. That stood out of my mind. And let's see what Prabhupada says in the purport. Here. If others try to put a devotee into anxiety, he is not disturbed. It is by the grace of the Lord that he is so practiced that he is not disturbed by any outward disturbance. Actually, because a devotee is always engrossed in Krishna consciousness and engaged in devotional service, such material circumstances cannot move him. Generally, a materialistic person becomes very happy when there is something for his sense gratification and his body, but when he sees that others have something for their sense gratification and he hasn't, he is sorry and envious. So that's another point. So, and then there's one other point that was made that stood out in my mind. Who's, of course, equal both in happiness and distress, so if you're offended, that's distress. Who is tolerant. And then Krishna says always self-satisfied and self-controlled. So, one of the things that is very valuable for us is to learn how to deal with these states when we become disturbed, and how to take control of that. And by taking control of that, I mean we don't respond from that place of disturbance, but rather we try to respond from the place of Krishna consciousness, which Krishna is describing in these verses, such as, okay, someone has done something to me and I'm offended. And then Krishna says, free from false ego, equal in happiness and distress, tolerant, satisfied, self-controlled. So that's the way I want to respond. Now you're probably thinking, well, that sounds easier said than done. But what we're really talking about is, a kind of self-control or self-discipline where although you feel one way, as in this case, offended, and therefore when you're offended you want to retaliate, that's how you feel, but you respond with being equal. Okay, this is distressful, but I'm not going to allow it to distress me. You see what I'm saying? It is distressful, but you're not going to go with the distress. You understand? Okay, I feel distressed, but I'm not going to become distressed. I'm going to deal with it, and I'm going to process it, and I'm not going to respond to the world with distress, but rather with tolerance, with self-control. That's what's being said here. So, what's nice about these verses is Krishna saying that this is how you become dear to him. So, I think it's good to not think that the proper response is something optional, but I think we should think it's part of devotional service, just like we chant 16 rounds, and we know that's not optional, or we follow certain principles and practices which are not optional. It would be nice if we thought that this kind of behavior is also not optional, because this is what pleases Krishna. Krishna says, this devotee is dear to me. That means if we respond this way, it's pleasing to Krishna. So it's nice to think that way, when you're upset and you're about to respond in a way which isn't Krishna conscious, then you can think, this is how Krishna wants me to respond. This is pleasing to him. So, if I become upset, it's not pleasing to Krishna. If I control my emotions, it's pleasing to Krishna. So it's a nice meditation. I was giving class, I was giving class on this topic, and you'll be able to get a copy of this class. It was called "What is Pure Bhakti?" and I just gave it on Monday night, and so it'll be uploaded hopefully within a week under the heading of Mayapur Retreat. I gave 5 workshops. And the main theme that was coming out of this class was that we want to be lovable to Krishna. So what does lovable to Krishna mean? How can I act in a way which is lovable to Krishna, that makes me lovable? Oh, you're so lovable. You are so lovable. Well, how can I be lovable to Krishna? What can I do that would make me lovable? Because Krishna, you see, he wants to love us, but we have to be lovable. It's hard to love someone who's not lovable. I think sometimes, you try that. And, your spouse does something which is not lovable. And you want to love her or him, but it's hard to love him or her when they're not doing things which are lovable. So Krishna wants to love us. I mean, he does love us. That's he does love us. But in terms of rasa, Krishna loves us. That's tattva. God loves everyone. That's just a fact. But in terms of a relationship, a loving relationship, we have to become lovable. So these verses in the Bhagavad Gita are nice because Krishna's saying, well, if you do this, you become dear to me. Like if your wife or husband said, if you did this, it would really help the relationship. So that's a key. Oh, I should do that. That will help the relationship. Or your son or daughter says, if you did this, it would really help the relationship. So Krishna's saying, if you do this, it'll really help the relationship. Which means if you don't do it, it will hurt it. Or it'll just keep it where it's at. So, becoming lovable to Krishna. That's a nice meditation. So Timothy has a question. Hardest thing for me, and from what I'm now seeing in others, is we hold on to the resentment because we don't want, lose, or have the other feel they're better or winning. Oh, we don't want to lose. But it's so ridiculous. This is so helpful. See, what's important to understand in these kinds of discussion is that these kinds of responses, like I'm offended or I don't want to let go because they'll be in an advantageous position, they're winning, these are all conditioned responses. And what's important to understand is, as devotees, we are supposed to be learning how to respond differently. Now, a lot of times what the problem is that we think, like, let's say you have a conflict with your wife or your husband, and I think we talked about this before, and then you just feel like this is how you are. This is just, they deal with you this way, you respond that way, that's just who you are. But that is who you are conditionally. But the point is, becoming a devotee, we're supposed to be purifying that conditioned nature. And part of the way you purify that conditioned nature is you don't act upon it. So the fact that it's there, or the fact that you're experiencing these things, and which you rightly said we all do, is not abnormal. It's pretty normal for a conditioned soul. And we are now engaged in devotional service, but we're basically conditioned souls engaging in devotional service. So the difference between ourselves and other people is not so much that we don't experience these things, because we often do. And sometimes we may be coming from more difficult situations than other people, and we may become more upset by things than even a non-devotee. But the difference between a devotee and a non-devotee is now we're practicing to respond differently. So it's not that we won't feel the things that other people feel. We won't feel the hatred or the envy or the jealousy. But we're learning now how to respond to them in a Krishna conscious way. And then you see what happens is, by responding in a Krishna conscious way, you become more Krishna conscious. Now when you hit a certain level of Krishna consciousness, you're not going to respond like everybody else. You're going to naturally not be offended. You're going to naturally be tolerant, humble, and so forth. So the challenge is, until you come to that level, how will you respond? But the important point is that if you respond in a Krishna conscious way, that helps you come to the level in which you will naturally respond in a Krishna conscious way. But if we're not on that level yet, then we have to, it's a matter of self-discipline and self-control. Like I said many times, and I'll say it again because it's such good advice, that Patanjali advised that when you become envious of somebody, what you should do is try to become their well-wisher. And the point he's making is not that you feel like becoming their well-wisher. You don't. Because envy means you want to pull them down. You don't want to push them up. But what he's saying is that you should act that way, even though you don't feel like it. So an important mantra for us is act as if. In other words, we say, act as if you feel that way. You don't feel that way. Now, I'm envious of this devotee, but I'm going to act as their well-wisher. So I'm acting as if I'm their well-wisher, even though I'm envious. So that's what we're learning to do as devotees. I feel like doing something, but I'm going to act as if I don't feel like doing it, if that feeling is the wrong thing. I'm going to act in a way as if I don't feel like doing it, or I'm going to act in the way as if I feel like doing the right thing, even though I don't feel like doing it. And so that's a form of self-control and self-discipline, and that's what distinguishes ourselves from other people, because if we respond just like everybody else, then what distinguishes us from other people? And then, as we're saying, we also have this opportunity to be very dear to Krishna by acting in those ways. And so it's important to understand that when Krishna says he's free from happiness and distress, he's a kind friend to all living entities, that you shouldn't read that and think, okay, that's a stage that Krishna is describing that someday I will come to. Don't read it that way, but read it that now that's how I should be acting. And as I said, by acting that way, then you'll actually come to that stage. But if you think, no, I'll just do my sadhana without making an effort to act in these ways, it's going to take a long time. Because you have to see that acting in those ways is actually part of your sadhana. Not that I just do sadhana and I don't act in those ways and someday it'll come that I act in those ways. When will that day come? That is part of your sadhana. So now, if we take this into a situation of very close relationships, then in close relationships, naturally people will do things which are upsetting and disturbing, and this is where a marriage can go downhill very quickly, because often what happens is when people first come together, usually people, unless it's an arranged marriage, and even if it's arranged, generally the boy or the girl has some choice that say, I really don't like that boy, or I really don't like that girl, and the parents may look for someone else. As far as I understand, that's kind of how it happens nowadays, more than just, okay, we picked your husband or wife, you're not going to see them till the wedding day. So usually, let's talk about that, the situation where you're coming together because more or less you like one another, or you think you like one another, or it seems you like one another. Because that's more common. So if you do like one another, it seems like you like one another, you feel good about one another, what happens is that the more you like one another, the more actually enamored you are to another's faults. You don't notice them. You actually sometimes see the fault as something you like. But what happens is after being together for a while, that it may take a week, a year, I'm not sure, it's different for different people. Usually a few months. The liking, that super strong attachment and liking, which sometimes is really just hormonal. It's dopamine. Dopamine being secreted. That's when people fall in love. There's dopamine is secreted. And they're a bit intoxicated. And everything is just wonderful. It's like a drug. But it doesn't last. And, to the degree that you're quote-unquote in love, you'll tend to see only the good in a person. But then, after marriage or after you get close to them, you realize, which you should have known before, but you may not, is that people are not perfect, and that person may do things that you particularly wouldn't do yourself and you particularly don't like, and it can be quote-unquote disturbing. And that's true in any relationship. It's just in other relationships you don't get doped up on dopamine, so you kind of see the faults sooner or right away. In any case, we all have faults, and by working with another person, we become acquainted with those faults. So all this advice here is very good, because now you learn how to overlook them, tolerate them, accept them. That's just the nature of this person. Not be offended by them. These are all qualities that we're learning to develop, and they will develop more strongly as we become Krishna conscious. Now, another thing that I teach that I think is important in relation to the question Timothy's asking, and you're saying, okay, I've been offended and I don't want to lose. I feel the person's winning. You have to be able to detach a little bit from that and just look at it for what it is. Kind of step back from your own experience a little bit and look at it and get some perspective. And then you'll start to see how foolish that is. And if you like, allow yourself to now have the experience of what it's like to feel that by giving up your resentment, you'll be the loser. What's the experience of that? It's not a Krishna conscious experience. So right in that moment when you're feeling, if I forgive this person, then he'll take advantage, I'll be the loser, he'll get away. Allow yourself to experience that. That experience will be very much the experience of material consciousness or materialistic person. And then by allowing yourself to experience what you're experiencing, which sometimes we don't even realize it's material consciousness, but allow yourself to experience the depth of the material consciousness, it can be an impetus to push you out of that, because you realize that this is not the right way to think, and thus what I'm experiencing is really a very low level of consciousness. Even though I'm a devotee, at any moment I can go down very, very low in these kinds of emotions. So sometimes if you allow yourself to experience that, the experience is so not Krishna conscious that it kind of shakes you up and you realize, oh, this is really not the way I'm supposed to be thinking. A lot of times we don't really fully experience the negativity of those low levels of consciousness. But if we allow ourselves to feel it more fully, it's such a bad feeling, it's such a non-Krishna conscious feeling that those feelings can kind of sober us up and wake us up to what's really going on and kind of push us into a better state of consciousness and realizing that I should just let this go and move on with my Krishna consciousness. Because that lower consciousness is really, if you want to visualize it, it's basically like putting yourself in jail, the jail of material consciousness, because you can't move in Krishna consciousness well if you're allowing yourself to be overly disturbed by these things and holding on to some form of revenge or hatred or getting back. That's really the pits of material consciousness. That's why, you go through the Bhagavatam, there's so many stories of devotees responding to hurt, to defamy, to offense, and they're responding very neutrally, or they're responding in a positive way, and offering mercy to the people who are hurting them. So why are those stories there? Are they just stories? Did it just happen to accidentally fall in the Bhagavatam? No, they're there to help us deal with situations like you're describing here, because we don't naturally think that way. And those stories are there, and what they're saying is, here's a pure devotee, this is how they're acting, this is how you're supposed to act also. You're supposed to work towards this. They're saying, this is why this story's here in the Bhagavatam, because it's showing you what's the right action. This is what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to learn that this is how you're supposed to act. And even if you don't feel like acting this way, and even though I know it's artificial, and I know you're going to say, but it's artificial. Yeah, but it may be artificial, but acting the other way is wrong. So would you rather be artificial or wrong? Now, I would say, and from another perspective, it's not artificial, because it's the way we're supposed to act. So it's the right way to act. And if the right way to act is artificial, it just means we're conditioned souls. And so a lot of right ways to act for us will be artificial. It's okay that they're artificial. It's just, that's normal. It's gonna, like when you're really sick, things don't taste good. So you don't want to eat it. But you have to eat something. So it's almost artificial to eat because you can't taste anything, you're not that hungry, but you have to eat. So we shouldn't look at the word artificial in a negative way. We should look at it in a way that we're just not spontaneously acting in the right way yet. So that's artificial for me, but that doesn't mean it's that you shouldn't do it because it's artificial. Like maybe you have to learn something and it might feel artificial, it doesn't feel natural or normal because you're not used to doing it that way, but that's the best way to do it, so you do it, even though it feels artificial. So in other words, the Krishna consciousness, it's not just about doing it because you feel like it, because if you only do it because you feel like it, that works when you're Krishna conscious, because you'll only feel like serving Krishna and you'll be attracted to hearing and chanting and so forth, and being humble and like that. But you can't say that for the conditioned soul, because if you only say I do it because I feel like it, then what are you going to do? You're going to eat, sleep, mate, and defend. That's the problem, right? You understand? So sadhana bhakti, vaidhi means rules and regulations, so sadhana means practice. So sadhana bhakti means you don't do it because you feel like it, you do it because the rule says to do it. Because we know if you do it because you feel like it, that only works on higher levels. That's called raganuga sadhana bhakti, where that's impelled by the feeling. But the feeling is what? What's the feeling of raganuga bhakti? That you're following in the footsteps of of one of the inhabitants of Vrindavan in a particular relationship, and you want to develop that relationship, same relationship they have. You want to develop the feelings they have. So when you're doing it because you want to, that's what's impelling you. So that's a practice also. And the other practice is Vaidhi. And Vaidhi is the practice before you come to Raganuga, where you don't feel like doing it. I feel like taking revenge against this person. But the sadhana is be kind, be compassionate, be tolerant, and so forth. So it's a very important point. And that's what we're dealing with. Okay, now Alejandro says, if you have to deal with a crazy person, you mean your mother, right? And you are sure, because your life has been showing you many times, that this person is going to treat you bad in one point. What do? Well, if a person is crazy, I think Alejandro's saying her mother has, I think, Alzheimer's or something. So if you have Alzheimer's and you don't act normally, and you may... It's like the example Prabhupada gives. He gives this example that sometimes a doctor will try to administer treatment to a patient, and the patient will hit the doctor. If the patient, I've never seen it. I'm not a doctor. Maybe Marina could tell us. I don't know. But there's a devotee she deals she works with mentally ill people, and she's been hit a couple times and was thrown against the wall. So because they're mentally ill, she doesn't take revenge against the person. She understands that she said something or did something which was not wrong on her part, but the person reacted that way. So the doctor understands, okay, this person is in pain, or the person, is resistant to medicine, and so, maybe children do that, I don't know. They yell at the doctor, I hate you, or whatever. So if the person's actually crazy, then at least you understand they're crazy, and then you deal with them accordingly. There was a nice question that was asked in class that sort of relates to this. Oh, so that's your question. How do you deal with someone who's constantly treating you bad? Well, let me tell you what happened in class. And it sort of relates to this, and then I'll elaborate on it. The class was about association, how we need to associate with devotees, and the detriments of associating with non-devotees. So one said, but how do you deal with family and close friends? And people you love. And an elaborate answer was given about, do we really love them, and do they really love us? But the end of the question was, a devotee is nice, a devotee is kind, a devotee is affectionate. That's their nature. Right, that's the nature of devotee. So we shouldn't ask the question, well, how does a devotee deal with non-devotees? A devotee deals with everybody kindly, affectionately. That's how we deal with everyone. But just as a side point, what it means in association means that we don't get very intimate, where we're revealing our mind and our hearts with non-devotees. That's what association means, that's very intimate. But in general, you're very kind. So if we apply that to your situation, Alejandra, how do you deal with someone who's constantly treating you bad? Number one, you understand why she's treating you bad, because she's not in control. She's got a disease. So you understand that, and you don't take it personally. And you take it as an opportunity to develop all kinds of tolerance and compassion and kindness, and you feel bad for her because she's in this situation, and you know it's not within her capacity to treat you well, and she's not really trying to hurt you, and you have a service to her, and you do your service, and you tolerate this, and you think that this is really a good situation Krishna's putting me in, because it's teaching me how to be extremely tolerant, and this is going to help me in so many ways of my life. That's one way to think. Now, as I was saying earlier in the class, that sometimes we're not that advanced that we can do that. So you might say, but I'm not that advanced yet. I mean, I understand the principle, and most of the time I can do it, a lot of the time I can do it, but sometimes I can't. That means you're dealing realistically with your threshold. How do you know what your threshold is? Your threshold you know because your threshold is that you try all these things, and then you say, okay, I've tried, but I've hit this point in which I can't tolerate it at this point. So then you have to you have to adjust your physical situation so that you can be more tolerant. So the physical situation might be you get a helper to deal with her, and then she just offends the helper. So instead of being offended 100 times a day, you're offended only 50. You can deal with 50, but 51 you can't deal with. 50 is your limit. So sometimes you have to make those adjustments. Hold on a second. You see what I'm saying? So, I'm not saying that in our conditioned state we have unlimited tolerance, unlimited compassion. All I'm saying is that we try as best we can to manifest as much tolerance and compassion and so forth as we can. And after doing that, if we realize there's a situation which is it's making it so difficult for me to be peaceful, to chant my rounds, to do my service. It's like a boat that is rocking from one side to another, and it's like I can't even function on this boat. I can't walk, I can't sit, I can't eat, I can't do anything. If it's that difficult, then you have to jump off the boat and you have to make some adjustment externally. Prahlad Maharaj, like Marina says, was the symbol of tolerance. He was tolerating everything. He's giving us that example. Now, that's an example for us. Obviously, if we were in that situation, probably we wouldn't be able to tolerate it, and we'd have to adjust accordingly. But we would do our best. We want to do our best. That's the example he gives Queen Kunti as well. Yeah, so Marina confirmed. Somebody wanted to kill me because I put him on a diet of no food before surgery. Yeah, so I'm Marina's used to that, so she's not. She goes, well, then no surgery for you. You can just die. Obviously she doesn't respond that way because she just understands that that's normal for certain people. That's how they're going to respond. And she just has to go with the punches, as we say. Right? Otherwise, if she couldn't do that, she couldn't function in her profession. Right? So, did that answer your question? Okay, so we've gone about an hour now, so I will. I just want to. I will bring this to more of a conclusion. Within any close relationship, any discussion, advice, books you'll read, lessons you'll get on relationships, always forgiveness will be there. And so when we say forgiveness, we also mean tolerance. Tolerating the wrongs of another person, forgiving what they do, even if they don't apologize. That's a necessary element to having an ongoing working relationship. So that, because otherwise what happens is, get affected by something that happened in the past, and what happens in the past will color the present relationship. So, okay, everything's going good now, but what you did in the past, that was really bad. So, it's even though things are going well now, that will contaminate the relationship because you bring up the past. I could read you, I think it would be interesting. I'm going to read you something, not written by me, it's written by a marriage expert, but it deals with this. He makes a few good points, which we can read just to put some icing on the cake or something. I don't know if you'll think it's icing, but something on the cake. I just have to find it. If you give me a moment. If I titled it. How to get over past hurt. Yeah, okay. So let's read this. So your spouse or somebody does something that really hurt you. So he's saying, if your marriage is in trouble, there's good chances that you need to put that hurt behind you. How do I get over the past? It's a common question that's asked to him. So he says, what does it really mean to get over the past? And then he makes a point that I was making. You can't change what happened, so it already happened. And so then he's making a really nice point. So just be clear on what you can change and what you can't change. And like we say in our forgiveness workshop, how much the past affects you, that's up to you. How much you allow it to affect you. So you can get over your past, but you can't change it. That's his point. And so most people get hung up in the past. And they don't work on changing how it affects them. So we have to learn that. Okay, so this is how this person deals with me. Okay, how do I deal with it? How do I respond with it? That's what I can change, and that's what we're learning to do as devotees. So we all have challenges. Alejandro, you have a certain challenge, and it keeps coming up, and it's very difficult, and it's something that you'll have to consider how much you want to deal personally with it and how much you want other people to deal with it. And as I always say, that you try your best to be Krishna conscious in every situation, utilizing what we talked about today, and I've talked about this in other ways before. And then at that point you see where you're at, and you see how this situation, can I deal with this situation in a way that I can be Krishna conscious? Or are there certain factors in the situation that are just, they're damaging to Krishna consciousness? It's not a subjective thing, it's just the nature of it. These are not helpful, these are against devotional principles. Like I have to cook meat for my mother or something. No, we're not going to do that. So we have to put a line somewhere, we have to draw the line. Or, it's affecting, she stays up late at night and I have to take care of her, and then I don't get up early, and I have to go to work at 8 and I don't chant my rounds in the morning. So these things we don't tolerate. We don't tolerate things which are not conducive to our bhakti. That kind of tolerance would be foolish. So you have to look at those things and you'll say, okay, these things I should not tolerate, therefore I should get someone else to do these things. So that's how you have to deal with situations like that. So when I say, we should not be unlimitedly tolerant, one aspect of that is definitely we should not tolerate things which inhibit our devotional service. And of course, we want to be objective about those things, because sometimes we think something is inhibiting our devotional service, where it's actually the way we're dealing with it that it inhibits our devotional service. But if it's things which are more objective, like I'm saying, preparing meat, not being able to go to bed early, not having a conducive environment for chanting our rounds, things of that nature which are physical things which are wrong, are not Krishna conscious, then we have to adjust. So okay. So that's it's not always easy to understand the difference between what's subjective and what needs to be changed. That requires a little intelligence and a little experience. But I think one of the ways that you can understand that is just by accepting that Krishna consciousness is an internal process, and the general idea that nothing material can affect my consciousness, but at the same time understanding there are devotional principles and practices that are of the mode of goodness. And if we're in a situation that's preventing us from having enough of the mode of goodness in our life, then yes, those things will affect us. Sometimes we create mode of ignorance or passion out of our own consciousness. So then it's an internal thing, then it's an internal adjustment. But, if I'm in a situation which is too disturbing, and it would be too disturbing to anybody, and I've tried to deal with it, and it's so disturbing, it's having a negative effect on my bhakti, then we want to make adjustments, because there has to be some, a sufficient level of sattva gun, peacefulness in our life in order to execute Krishna consciousness. Okay. So, very good questions, practical, and I just wanted to sum this up. In dealing with another person, especially in a marital relationship, if we can get to this point, which was, I think, the beginning of the class, the question, if we get to this point where when we get offended, we ask ourselves, why am I feeling offended? What's going on? Is it a false ego thing? Is it pride? Is it my buttons, which I have to work on my own buttons? Should a devotee really get offended? Is that right? Or shouldn't a devotee be in a position where, even though another person offends them, they don't take offense? And then that's the ideal situation we want to think about, so that we don't get offended by our partner's idiosyncrasies or weird things they do, or the things they say that they really didn't mean to say or shouldn't have said. And then the second point, in summary, is that if we do get offended, we feel the offense. It's we want to respond with offense, but then we think of what's dear to Krishna. How should we respond in a Krishna conscious way? What are all those verses from the 12th chapter and other qualities Krishna describes of the devotee? We want to respond on that platform, even though we don't feel like it, but we want to act that way, because by acting that way we advance, and it brings us to eventually brings us to a higher point of Krishna consciousness, in which we act that way naturally. So that's what we're talking about here. So thank you all for coming.